This video is to provide teachers with an overview of Day 15 of Unit 3, which, as we see here, is about perspectives on immigration. If you are following the Passport to Social Studies curriculum, the preceding lesson was also about changing perspectives on U.S. immigration, focusing mostly on Southern and Eastern European immigrants. So the students do already have some exposure to these ideas. I bring this up because it is important that students see the continuity between our lessons and the recurring themes and skills. At this point in the unit, students are not only continually assessing whether an event demonstrates the progress or decline of American democracy across multiple lessons, but they are also practicing and strengthening their ability to utilize language of perspective into their writing and their discussions. This lesson starts, where is it here? This lesson starts with a map of the percent of foreign-born population in 1890 and a video from PBS, which the link to it is right here for the students. And both of these do a really great job at establishing the historical context for this time period. After showing this video to my students and giving them time to summarize the major points of it in this blue box right here, I would also provide them the opportunity to either react to what was in the video or draw connections between it and what they know about immigration in today's world. It is a very powerful video, and I would want to capitalize on my students' engagement. For students working asynchronously, that additional prompt could also be embedded into the slide itself. From here, the students then go to the next slide, and this is where first they are going to look at a table, which I'm going to pull up right here. And the title of this is Occupational Distribution of Chinese in San Francisco. And on the first page, we can kind of see the breakdown of the number of Chinese immigrants that had these occupations across 3 years, 1860, 70, and 1880. And on the second page, we can see kind of the annual wages of Chinese and whites in certain industries. And having the students actually take the time to digest this information, it's really going to be useful as it kind of sets the stage for some of the nativist beliefs that they're going to see throughout this lesson, including the political cartoon that they're going to look at in just a moment. And to kind of focus their analysis of this table, I would consider doing these two things. First, I would make sure they understand that wherever there's a blank, it does not mean it's a zero. It just means that data was not available. And it's kind of written down here in the footnote, but I know my students would be a little misled by that. And second, I would acknowledge to them that yes, they could go down here and look at the total, and that row definitely gives us kind of like the main gist of this article. But I would also encourage them to try to find the occupations that change the most and the least, and ask them to consider what insight this realization could provide to us, especially since we know that one of the reasons that nativists opposed to Chinese immigration was because they perceived them as being a threat to their economic livelihood. When we're done analyzing this table and it's time for us to move on to the cartoon, which I'm going to pull up right here, it is important for the students to be aware that yes, this cartoon does depict immigrants in hurtful, offensive ways, and despite being completely unacceptable in today's world, back during the era that we are studying, it was more accepted. And based on the video they saw earlier, students would likely be able to identify the figure on the right as an offensive stereotype symbolizing Chinese immigrants. And they could probably use the caption over here to identify this person in this image in the middle as being Uncle Sam. And however, the students, depending on their prior knowledge or prior courses of study, they might not be able to identify the figure on the left as being an offensive symbol of Irish immigrants. And lastly, students also might not even realize that this is actually a 3-panel cartoon kind of showing things in sequence. So they might benefit from also having that pointed out to them at the beginning of this analysis. So after looking at both the chart and the cartoon, the students are then presented with these 4 prompts. The first 2 are meant to guide their analysis of the cartoon, and the second 2 are meant as more of an application of their knowledge. And for both of these, I would urge students to begin thinking about the language of perspective again, just to get them thinking along those lines, because it is going to come up later on in this lesson. And if they have the language of perspective tool available to them, I would definitely draw their attention to kind of like the word bank for the nouns, verbs, adverbs, and verb phrases that they're presented with here, as a way to kind of bolster their responses to these last two prompts. From there, the students analyze the Chinese Exclusion Act. Where is it? The Chinese Exclusion Act poster. They will also read excerpts from the Chinese Exclusion Act itself. And there are some guiding prompts that we gave them to help them through this process. Ultimately, they are going, here they go. Ultimately, they are going to be reading a letter written by Wang R. Chang to William Lloyd Garrison, where he rails against the growing support for Chinese exclusion. And this lesson does end with a check for understanding, where they have to apply their knowledge of the Chinese Exclusion Act and its related events to determine whether it was a period of progress or decline for American democracy. Because time is limited, and with all the other difficulties presented with remote instruction, we have to be mindful of what the highest leverage activities are that we present to our students. Now, I know that this lesson, for instance, I know this lesson does call for the students to read these two texts and highlight for evidence of progress and decline as they go through. And this makes sense because this is directly tied to the unit assessment. However, if you think that your students may benefit also from examining the language of perspective as a way to kind of strengthen their writing and discussions, I'm going to demonstrate a few adjustments that you could make for both students who are working synchronously and asynchronously. One example could be for students doing this lesson synchronously to be paired up, maybe utilizing the Zoom breakout room function if it's available, to read this letter by Wang R. Chang. And both students will read the text, and one is directed to annotate for progress and decline, just like it says in the original directions. However, the other can be told that as they read, their responsibility is to identify by highlighting all the elements of the language of perspective they come across. And they can then share their findings with each other at the end and collaborate on creating responses to the three prompts that we see here following this text. And this would expose students to two of the concepts being honed across these lessons. Another option would be for students to work together to apply the language of perspective to their analysis of the Chinese exclusion poster, which we see here on slide 14. And one way this can be achieved would be for students to examine this poster with a copy of the language of perspective tool nearby, which I'm going to pull up right here. And the students can then discuss which of these aspects are most relevant to their examination of this poster. And to encourage discussion, student groups can be directed to start with 3 of these aspects and then collaborate and narrow it down to 2, and finally narrow it down to 1, but all the while being reminded that there is not necessarily a correct response to this. A last option that can be incorporated into this lesson to reinforce the language of perspective would be for the students to do the Wang R. Chung reading as is, and when they are responding to the third wrap-up question, which we can see right here, the students can practice incorporating this language into their verbal explanation of their response to this prompt by using the word banks and sentence starters that we see here in the language of perspective tool. You have the word banks. You also have the sentence starters right here, and they can do this in either a small group discussion, via like a breakout room scenario, or the students can do it as a whole class share out using an online typing platform such as a Zoom chat if you're using Zoom, or Padlet, or any other available online discussion board. For students who might be doing this work asynchronously, but you still want them to practice incorporating this language of perspective into their verbal responses, a site allowing students to post video responses to prompts created by their teachers, like Flipgrid, can also be utilized. But again, these options are not only contingent on the unique needs and strengths of your students, but also on the time and technology that you have available.